Hi, I'm Dave Smith. I'm the founder of Sequential Circuits back in 1974.
We were on our way to the NAMM show, traveling there, and we stopped to get gas. And Lucas, our videographer, walked up to me holding his phone, and he said, "Dave Smith died." And both of us just thought, no, that can't be. We were just there. We just a few weeks ago interviewed him in San Francisco. He was so healthy and so vibrant, and it just didn't make sense that he had passed away. So it was really hard to comprehend. So while we were at the NAMM show, everyone was kind of walloped with this news, and we thought, it'd be an appropriate thing and a nice thing to film some interviews of people that knew Dave Smith and sort of make a tribute to him. So that's what we set out to do.
I had a background both in music and in engineering. So, I was growing up, we had a piano in the house. So I played the piano, just playing around. And then the 60s, the Beatles showed up. So like everybody else in the world, I switched to guitar, started playing guitar. I went away to school, college, played in bands, played guitar or bass in bands. But I was also getting a degree in electrical engineering and computer science from the University of California at Berkeley. So I finally graduate, and I've got two passions. I have technical engineering and computers and all of that. And this is pretty early from computers. This is 1971. But I also had this music background. So basically what happened is somebody said, "Hey, there's this little store in Santa Clara that has a synthesizer in it." I go, "Oh, I've heard of those. That sounds interesting." So I went down to this little store, and sure enough, they had an ARP Odyssey and a Mini Moog. And this is, I think, in 1972. And I had no idea what they did, but I saw a keyboard and a bunch of knobs, and I knew I had to have one. My first job at college was at Lockheed Missiles and Space, because back then, the only jobs engineers got were in aerospace. I mean, that was it. There was no Silicon Valley yet. So I went to their credit union the next day, got a credit union loan for $1,500, went back the next day and bought the Mini Moog. That's what got me on this path. I still have it. It's in the other room. You'll have to get a shot of it. It was a serial 1340. I think they started at 1,000, so it was like, number 340 off the line. And yeah, somehow it's survived the almost 50 years now. In fact, maybe it was 50 years ago I got it. 1972, 2022, maybe you should be giving it a birthday party here soon.
The first time I met Dave Smith was the summer NAMM at in Atlanta in I think it was 87 or 88. It might have been even earlier than that, I'm not sure. But I was riding from the hotel to the trade show, and with Bruce Crockett, the founder of Ensoniq. And he said, "Listen, I'm going to meet a couple guys and I'll introduce you to them. And, we'll have coffee for a minute, then we'll go grab dinner." So these two guys walk up, and it's Dave Smith and Bob Moog. And I'm thinking, I'm standing here with Bruce Crockett, Dave Smith, and Bob Moog. And if I was one of those kids' puzzles and I had to circle the one that didn't belong, that would have been me.
I started with Sequential Circuits in my teenage years. My first synthesizer was a Sequential Circuits 6-track, and I absolutely fell in love. And I became just obsessed with sequential, and ended up with a multi-track, a Split 8, a Prophet 600, a Prophet 5, a Tom, drum tracks over the years. They were just something magical about what Dave had put into it. And when I was fortunate enough to finally meet him, it was NAMM sometime in the early 2000s, and he had just formed DSI and had just come out with the Evolver, and I turned into a total fanboy the very first time I was introduced to him, when he wanted to just talk about Evolver, and I just wanted to talk about his career and was like, wow.
I hear people talk about what a great inventor he was, and I hear people talk about what he did with, marketing his MIDI and his first programmable polyphonic synthesizer, and I was with him before that became MIDI, right? And the thing that I want to always stress and inject into these conversations is what a good guy David was. He was just a nice man.
When we went to interview him in San Francisco for an upcoming Synth Wizards episode, I was kind of starstruck. I'd never met him before. Here's the guy that invented MIDI. Here's the guy that created the Prophet 5, one of the most iconic synthesizers out there. And I was just kind of starstruck. But after being with Dave the first minute, you're no longer starstruck. You feel like, I'm just sitting with an old friend. He was that kind of guy. He was very warm and welcoming, unassuming, not at all any air of I'm a big shot or anything like that. Just really a warm and friendly guy, and you felt so at home with him. In fact, after we did the interview, he gave us each a bottle of wine that he had made from grapes grown in his backyard, and it's got a Sequential logo on the wine, and I thought, this is really something. I'm keeping this. And we'd also lugged this Prophet 5 Rev 1 along the trip with us, and I wanted to ask him to sign it, and of course he did. He was no problem with that, and so he signed it, and later on we got Dave Rossum also to sign it, so this is a cherished piece of history here.
Well, it was all crazy. You have to remember, I had a part-time job. I had a full-time job until I think early 1977. I finally quit and kind of lived off credit cards for a couple of years while trying to get everything going. I was selling the Model 800 digital sequencer and a Model 700 programming unit that added programmability to Mini Moogs and ARP 2600s. I actually waited a little while before starting on the Prophet 5 design. I had the idea because I knew about the microprocessors. I also had heard via EMU guys, Dave Rossum, that this solid-state music chipset was coming out. So it seemed obvious to me. Well, got a VCO, got a filter, got some envelopes, got some VCAs, got a microprocessor, piece of cake. So I started like maybe in spring of 1977, just started working on the design, and I pretty much did the whole thing. I designed the metal and the woodwork, the mechanical side. I laid out the circuit boards. I did the schematics. I wrote all the software, and that was an interesting process. I learned a lot, and I was still. It was kind of a big job for me. I was kind of maybe a little cocky about being able to actually pull it off. But I did breadboard one voice, just with some pots and, and one of those old, whatever you call them, breadboard units, and it sounded pretty good. It sounded really good. So I knew that when I had 5 of those in a box with programmability, that it was going to be a pretty awesome instrument.
I just heard the news about Dave Smith's passing, and I remember being around. I didn't work directly on the album, but Devo, Freedom of Choice, Whip It, all that whole. They had multiple Prophet 5s, and I was fascinated by it. Just like I'm a tinkerer. I went in the studio and I knew the assistant on the project, and then I got to know Mark Mothersbaugh and the other guys, and now I work with Mark. He's a film composer, and I was just fascinated by the sound of it. It was so different. It couldn't have been more different than anything else that was out there. It had a and it's the Devo sound. To talk about an instrument dictating a record sound, that's the Prophet.
When it comes to instruments, it's very rare. This has only happened like twice, I would say, where I've come up and used an instrument and almost felt as if it was made for me, or like I just knew where everything was. And immediately, of course, that was to just the entire sequential line. I knew that immediately that these synths were built with a lot of care and a lot of love, especially just to be a playable instrument. And having an instrument like that you can just immediately understand has felt amazing. And eventually that just led me down the path of trying to figure out who it was that was making these. And of course that led me down to Dave Smith and just his entire legacy and imprint on the synth world. And that his legacy will definitely live on past a lot of us, but I've never had somebody so influential, as far as like musical impact.
Then over the years, I got to know Dave through the various companies, through Ensoniq, and at NAMM, I'd stop and see him at the show, and on occasion we would schedule a meeting ahead of time and either have coffee or just talk. But he may be one of the most soft-spoken people in the industry. He was a quiet guy, but you kind of felt this energy that you were in the room with you were in the room with one of the greats ever. And but he is, he's a legend. He's right there with Bob. And I said to somebody yesterday, I said, NAMM without Dave Smith is like heaven without God. It is just, it's a shock to everybody because he's such a legend and such an influence. And there isn't anybody that uses MIDI today or uses electronic keyboards who is not affected directly by Dave Smith.
Yeah, the Sequential Vibe and way back was just crazy. We were all kids. We didn't, I was in my 20s. I didn't know what I was doing. None of us knew what we were doing. We were just winging it the whole time. But it was fun. We had a lot of good times. We'd have a lot of big company parties. We'd, randomly one day we'd just have buses pull up, take all the employees and go out to lunch or go have a party or go on a picnic or something. And so we tried to keep it, interesting and fun, and just about everybody was into music, so that helped because they, the products we were building, they could see musicians using them, they could hear them on records. So that was all very fun. It was very wacky.
I was genuinely happy a few years back when Dave got the name to his company, Sequential, back. That was poetic justice. And I remember seeing a couple of photos where, as humble as he was, you could just tell that he was overjoyed and he was glowing, standing in front of this Sequential banner again.
Yamaha bought Sequential in 1988, 89. We were about to go out of business, and they bought it, and never quite sure why, and I don't think they were quite sure why, because it all happened really quickly. But after about a year, they just shut it down. But of course, they owned everything that was part of Sequential before that, including the names. So when I started my new company 20 years ago, I called it Dave Smith Instruments. Kind of boring, but I didn't want to use a Sequential name. I didn't own it. And I was trying to do something different and new. I had no idea where it was going to end up. It was just something to do. And fast forward a few years, 2013, I got my Grammy with Kakahashi-san, the founder of Roland, for MIDI. And I didn't know this was happening because he didn't tell me, but he wrote a letter to the president of Yamaha and said, hey, it'd be kind of cool if you gave Dave the rights to his names back because you're not using them, why not? It'd be cool to do. And damned if they didn't. And then we officially changed the company name in 2018, because sure, it makes more sense. I like it because my email name went from Dave at Dave Smith Instruments to Dave at Sequentials. Much smaller, much easier to type. That was the best part. It was so awesome of Yamaha to do that. That was really cool.
I was working at Focusrite Group at the time, and I found out that we had completed the acquisition, that Sequential was joining the family of brands. And almost overnight, it was like I went from having a great job to having my dream job, that I was going to get to work with Sequential again. And I was really excited to have his thoughts and feedback and what was going to be happening even with the Novation brand in the future. The timing was just kind of awful, but I'm still really excited to see what else he was working on Sequential someday.
Similar to like Charles, I was working at Focusrite Group at the time when we acquired Sequential, and I was extremely excited to work closer with him. And I've never been starstruck before, and of course I've met Dave a ton of times prior, but it's still just being around someone like that, so influential and so powerful. It's just amazing to see someone like that, and then to find out that they're one of the kindest, sweetest people. And just a testament to that, at one point I remember I really wanted to get a Mofo X4, or the X4 I should say, and I was like, you know what, I wonder if I can just figure out his email, and I'll just email Dave at davesmithinstruments.com, and like within an hour he responded back, was like, hey, how's it going? Yeah, I'll help you out, here, talk to this person and we'll get you a discount and all that stuff. And then of course meeting him in person is just incredibly nice, incredibly sweet.
Having Focusrite pick us up is awesome from my point of view. I'm not as young as I used to be, and I'm starting to think, well, I really should have somebody else run this company. I mean, that's really the right thing to do, and to make sure it keeps going forever. And Focusrite was perfect. I talked to a number of companies, and the cultural fit with them is like perfect. And what's really amazing is that it all happened over Zoom. I still haven't met them in person. This is a year later. But so now, we hired a CEO last July, who's running the company now, and I'm more just doing the fun stuff, new designs, engineering. That's my hobby. I don't want to retire. I'm not going to go out fishing, and I want to design synths. That's what I do. So this is perfect. We are going to grow more. We've got some pretty awesome stuff coming up in the next 2 or 3 months. Hint, hint, wink, wink. All kinds of stuff possible going forward. And that's all I'll say.
MIDI is a practical idea. It's not like, there's some really highfalutin kind of intellectual thing going on, or every time you use it, I have to get paid for it. It was kind of an open source thing available to everybody, and he took and solved a problem. How do I make a Prophet 5 play a Jupiter 8? It was a brilliant, simple solution. Or it might have been a complicated solution, but a simple application. I take one cable, I plug it between instruments, and I'm done.
At this show, just 2 days ago, I had the opportunity to meet with Mr. Kakahashi's son, he reminded me, I think he said it was 13 years ago, we were together with Dave when they were given the Grammy Technical Award for MIDI. And Mr. Kakahashi at that time was not able to travel. His son came over from Japan, and so we were all at the award ceremony together. And to see Dave and Mr. Kakahashi's son be honored in that way for their contribution with MIDI. We all went to dinner afterwards. It was one of those where we put the Grammy in the middle of the table, so every time the waitress came around, it was like, there's the Grammy, and it was just a celebration. It was just wonderful.
In my current role with Roland, I recognize the kinship that Dave Smith had with Mr. Kakahashi, and I knew and I worked very closely with Mr. Kakahashi for many years in my time with Roland. And Mr. Kakahashi was always intentional. Even if you didn't know what he was intending, you just had to trust. He does everything with an intention. And when he and Dave came together to really kickstart the universal music interface originally, and then became MIDI. There's no doubt in my mind that he was very intentional in going to Dave. I think he would have been, felt comforted by Dave's humility and his sincerity. Needless to say, his skill and his vision. But that combination led to instruments and workflows that we enjoy today.
That has directly affected millions of musicians over the years, and most of them would never know that these two guys changed our world. And when you think about that too, the idea that two competitors would come together, bring in all the other competitors to have a universal interface that we can all work together for the benefit of the industry. It is pretty amazing when you think about at that time how competitive the industry was.
Obviously we've influenced a lot of stuff, music, just technology, everything. But you could argue that, okay, I was in the right place at the right time. I knew about microprocessors when nobody else in the industry did. I saw the opportunity of the chips, so I was able to put it together and do something like that. So yeah, what I'm most proud of is that I actually have done it twice. So I came back 20 years later, started Dave Smith Instruments, and here we are. And this company is much more successful than the original one was. And because everything I've learned. But to be able to be relevant a second time and starting from scratch a second time, there's no investment, there's no big thing. I just kind of started this company and here we are, and that's probably my shining achievement, I think. The whole MIDI thing is, kind of like whatever, that was just a one-shot thing, but doing this twice, I think that's pretty cool. The new sequential, like I've said a couple times, it's really awesome. There's something about having the right people, the right size, to be able to do things like we've done with such a small team. When I compare us and our product line to huge companies out there and their product lines, it's like, wow, this is a pretty special thing we have going here. There's something magical about what we ended up with, and it's very cool.
I remember when we were getting ready to go interview Dave in San Francisco, and that might have been one of the last interviews done with Dave. I was wondering if we should fly there or if we should drive there, and I was posing this question to Lucas, our videographer, and if we flew there, we'd have to get lighting equipment and stuff there or compromise, and he didn't want to compromise in any way. He said, this is Dave Smith. There's not a bigger interview in the synthesizer world, and he was right. So it was really something to be able to interview him and be able to do a Synth Wizards episode on his creations.
When it came to Synthplex, he was so supportive and so effusive about wanting to come and participate in the community. He was at the first two that I put on back in the early 80s. Dave Smith was there in a control room with his gear, talking to everybody who walked through the door as though they were the most important person in the world. He was that kind of focused guy. I loved my friendship with Dave, and very sad. And I'm surprised. I'm surprised that we lost him so quickly. I thought he'd be here many more years.
And we were talking, if not daily, several times a week on how to make this NAMM show such a big splash, because we all love Tom. This was for Tom. But the passion that Dave and Marcus, they loved this guy. And the fact that they were giving so much of their time and energy to bring back Oberheim, that just speaks to who Dave was. I mean, that was Dave not as a business person, not as a legend. It was just Dave as a person. It's how we feel about our heroes, and that's how they felt about Tom. So just working with them just a week ago on final tweaks on press, okay, who's going to speak first at the Tech Awards? When you come up, it's a podium. You got to work this out, you guys. And it was Wednesday night, just before, so 2 days before the show opened. I was at our staff dinner when we get all our staff right before the show to do one last, okay, everybody. And Dan Del Fiorentino, who's our oral historian, came up to me and told me what had happened. And I was stunned. There's no word to describe it. I felt like I'd been punched. It was like disbelief. That can't be true.
With his instruments and everything that he put into it and doing what he loved to do, that it will live on. And I'm an even more proud owner of any sequential gear that I have. And it just makes it that much more special because they're just special instruments from every knob to every detail to each sound to everything. It's just amazing. I'm going to miss that man very much.
Now, Dave Smith, losing these legends, Bob Moog, Dave Smith. I mean, I hate to, everybody's getting older. But I think when you start losing your heroes and your legends in any industry, it just feels like there's a little less of something, a little less innovation, a little less vision. Not to say that there isn't a lot of vision coming up and there isn't a lot of stuff being created, but these guys were giants. Dave Smith is a giant.
When it comes to the saying, never meet your heroes, Dave was definitely an exception to that rule. I was just completely floored the first time I met him. It was just how human he was and approachable. And the mark he left on music and even on my life and career is just, it's something I can barely put into words. To say that we lost a legend is an understatement.
You lose some too young, and then you feel robbed. You feel like there's so much more, there's so much more to be explored. And I think someone like Dave was our guide along this journey in so many ways and kept pushing and pushing. And so we all lost. We lost that. We lost the next 20 years of Dave pushing us to be better and to bring new products to the artists and push music in even further. And we were able to get him into the tribute. We did the tribute the next night of the people we had lost in the past year. Usually that thing is, pretty well set in stone the week before we leave for the show. But the team got together and added Dave to the tribute. And I could just see as these people were all gathered in the lobby of the convention center as we did the tribute. And Dave's little video snippet came up, and there was a palpable inhale of everyone who was there going, because they didn't know. The word had not really gotten out yet. And the idea that this collective body of industry who had gathered for this tribute found out at the same time that Dave had passed. It was, I wouldn't have wanted to been anywhere else than that moment at that place, to be with all of our industry friends and family when we found out. So.
The world has lost somebody special, and our industry has lost somebody special with Dave. Sorry. Yeah. But somebody to celebrate as well. Yeah.
I think subtractive synthesis, subtractive analog synthesis has passed the test of time. It's been around for over 50 years. Everybody knows what happens when you turn a cutoff knob. Everybody knows what happens when you turn a resonance knob. This isn't going away. There's something permanent about that whole sound. Two oscillators, filter, envelopes. End of story. So that's what got us out of the digital dark ages. And it's here forever, I think.